All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Chapter 2. Yeah. A little bit of a content warning for this one that does contain some sexual content. So, yeah. I was having a really wonderful day today. Thought I'd pour myself a cup of coffee with some silly, fun artwork on it and, yeah, sit down to read to all of you. So, and also today I figured out how to do the screen sharing because I was able to think about it for longer than 10 seconds. And now you'll be able to read along with me. Last time, I did skip a few words, missed a few words, switched a few things around. I'm going to do my best to keep as to the actual words that I've written well, but try not to hold it too far against me if I don't do the best. And with all of that out of the way, Chapter 2, Feast for the Raid. Hail, Harold! Came the shouts from the crowd, all his gathered Drangr, the warriors, some holding up their sacred arm rings in respect for their lord. Hail! Many of them knelt in the sand. Some sat, some stood. Some were removing pieces of their armor. All were breathing hard at the battle well won. These men and these women towered over their defeated foe, a head taller at least to them. They were the giants in this land, the tall Jotnar, the rampaging war iron of the gods. Now then, started Harold, putting his hands in the air, all quieted at the gesture. From this look, it was clear he loved this. My fighting varings. Get all the bodies together. There, I want a great pyre built. We are to burn these bodies, asked one among them. Why not let them to rot, a signal to other of what befalls pirates? Do not be so quick to condemn the dead. We burn some dozen of our own as well. Our dead are bound for Valhall. They are different, the black-haired raider said, sitting on a rock and drinking a skin of water. He wore his helm still and held his axe before him like a stave. We are different, I know, and are bound for heaven. He paused a moment to let the words stay in the air, and to show he did not want to further the point too much. Upon their arrival and uptake into the servants of Byzantium, they were all baptized as Christians. It was the agreement struck with all the coming raiders and warriors who wished to be Varangian. But though they were now nominally Christian, many held to the old ways of their birthlands. Harold knew this to be happening among his crews, but would do nothing to punish their apparent blasphemy. Though our dead are most different, we burn our dead with offerings and will sacrifice the horses to their honor, and that they may ride in the courtyard. To this there was much shouts of dissent. The horses are a great prize. They will sell for good profit in Miklagard. I have already claimed one among them. My horse should not be sacrificed. They all spoke over each other, their voices drowning each of them away. And how do we take them to Miklagard? Will you ride them all the way? You are still needed on our long ships. Do you suggest we take them on the ship? How long would they last there before panicking and jumping into the water? We can take them nowhere. We cannot profit from them. There is more prize in this place than only the horses. Of that you can be assured. That house there has a store in it, and I have seen the prizes there. You will have the pride of plunder. We sacrifice the horses, he said sternly. There are 14 horses, only 12 of our dead. These last two I will allow as an offering to the god. This brought a quiet, respectful solemnity to the crowd. The raider himself smiled. Await the sacrifice for the gods to recognize your accomplishments, he said quietly to none but himself. And what is more is the food, Harold added. What of the food? Do we burn that too? Asked a woman with some small contempt. Do not question me, the commander shouted, walking toward the voice. We take what can be packed for the sailing, the water and the hard food. Everything else, he looked around at his Varing warriors. Everything else we will have for a grand celebration feast this night. The sailing Varangian all cheered together at this. Wine shall be shared at our victory here, and much good eating of their stores. We found herded in a pen 41 goats, too, that shall be butchered, though I think each ship can take 3 comfortably on our voyage. We will save 12 of them to eat on the voyage and slaughter the rest for tonight's feast. These tents and houses, too, will be secured of all their wealth. Tonight, we shall have many good meal fires and shall impress the god with our revelry. But first, it is my order that the pyres be made. Those Corsair pirates, there were 50 of them, we shall pile all together and leave to smolder. Our fallen dead king, though, will have a proper funeral flame made for them. They we shall send to heaven this very night, that their lick might rejoin with them in the after. The lick was their body, a distinct part of the soul, and once burned, it would reach the other parts of the warrior's soul when it turned to smoke. Harold has spoken, shouted one of the commander's lieutenants. Others were relaying similar charges to those around them. The black-haired raider called Fitbjorn heard a woman's voice speaking and realized that he lusted for a woman, as often came after a fight. Not yet was he in the place to order these warriors. Only could he go by his own action and hope to be followed. He put his axe over his shoulder and walked to the shore, where he would go and collect the first 2 men he slew this day, assuming they were not already moved. They were to be his charge. He would try and collect all of those that he killed this day, as that was still his responsibility. Perhaps even they would be waiting for him somewhere in the afterlife. It was said that those of the North who died as a coward or ring breaker were taken to hell, where they would suffer the worst of fates, an eternity suffering boredom. These warriors had their own paradise they were bound for. Would he see them again? Raider was not greatly a spiritual man. He knew some story of Valhalla, as all warriors did. He knew too of the tales of the gods and their deeds. He thought of them many times to reflect, but little did he attend his own souls. Perhaps it would serve him to learn more. What other secrets might he be able to learn, he wondered. He reached the place. It was near midday now. The blood of the dead was drying in the day's heat. His task, he decided, was only to collect his kills. Each of the dead would be searched for any valuables before the burning, a practice that he'd much rather leave to others. Raider unloaded his weaponry and his sweat-stained chain shirt and helmet in a pile near the ship. All he wore now was a thin linen tunic that was also quite sweat-soaked. He took a moment to wet his hair with the sea's water and shook it out. His black hair was long, reaching down to his chest, as did his beard. He found that, despite the amount of warriors running around and working at their task, the 2 dead were still there. He hoisted one up onto his shoulder and dragged the other by the arm. Through the center of the town, there was a road that he had avoided in his ride. It was harder packed than the sand, and this easier to tread. But still, it took him some time to take the bodies to where the majority of the dead were being piled. Do it once. Easy, friend. We have all day to do this work, said a man who sat and watched as he dropped the dead from his shoulders. He stretched with his hands on his hips, pressing his belly forward. Perhaps we do. And the sooner I am done here, the sooner I will feast. I see not the sense in rest before the work is done. The other man put up his hands, not wishing to argue the point at all. He then walked back through the village to the square between the four tents. Here he would have much work to do. Raiders stood again in the place between the stone wall and the tent, remembering the blind ferocity the corsairs threw at him, and how it was this very blindness that killed them. The bodies were taken from here, all of them. The dead were all gone. Perhaps they were walking undead, unable to leave this world. He looked around him. The danger must be over. Across his back, he wore still his axe. This was always with him. Across his front, he wore the sword and had a dagger hanging from his leather belt. You there! A voice came from behind him, where the horses had been. He turned and saw a woman he didn't recognize. Yes, he walked over to her. She was golden-haired, all of it in many messy braids. She had a scar running across her face, from her cheek to her ear. You were the one, weren't you? You're the one here to stand between the coming corsairs and we who were at the horses. You know of this? I told no one. I saw it. She smiled in smug satisfaction. You but stood and watched me? I did. I am impressed with you. But you could have warned them of the threat, called back to them. You didn't have to face such an odd alone. He stared through her, not missing her beauty. I did not think of that. He looked back at the red sand contemplatively. The horses were too much a distraction. Would they have turned? Would many screams and pleas for help have turned their attention? He looked up. In place of that, I showed the gods my prowess. Maybe they were watching me. There are many ways to impress the gods, she said. Who are you? Gertrude. And what are these ways? Fighting is what Valhall is. But as he said it, he knew he was wrong. And feasting. There are 5 good ways to impress the gods while on Midgard, big man. Fighting, feasting, fucking, hospitality, and a light hugger. Hugger? The thought? Why is this a way to impress the gods? Perhaps use your hugger and think on it. Did not, in the story, Odin many times trade in riddle and question with Jotnar and man? Consider when he went to bandy with Vafthrûdnir. Would not Odin be gladdened to have a bright mind to speak with, that smiles such? The lightness must live within us. She smiled. He considered her words. She took a step toward him. If you cultivate within your hugger of brightness, will not the gods more wish to have you at the feast in Valhall? Her voice was like a song to his ear. She was so beautiful. Perhaps we will all honor life and victory in Valhall in these ways. What? She asked with an amused expression. Did you say you want to fuck me in the afterlife? His expression turned stunned for a second, and he reddened. No, that is not what I meant. She nodded. Of course not. But, he added, if these are the ways to impress the gods with our skill on this place, then perhaps we better not wait until the Valkyrie are deciding. We have this night unto ourselves, do we not? She looked at him with a knowing smile. I think you saved my life today. Find me at the feast. She backed away from him and skipped away. He made a failed attempt at grabbing her hand. Gertrude, spear. I'll share a drink with you this night. Drinking is a part of feasting. The gods will most assuredly be watching. There shall be many chances to impress the gods this night. The raider looked back at the blood on the sand, the narrowed place. Much have the gods been impressed already this day. Ever shall it be my fate to impress them. Be not so certain of your fate. No one knows of our fate but the spinning Norns. Odin knew his fate. It was in the hands, in his own. I might hold my fate the same in time. He looked back to where she'd stood, and she was gone. Woman, he said, shaking his head. Odin, however did you manage knowing the secrets of woman magic? From there he returned to the funeral work. The bodies of the corsair were all stacked together with wood and oil. Their fire had already begun. Harold had the rest working to make each of the dead Varangian their own funeral rite, a horse set for each of them. They would be burned with their sacrifices in the night before the feasting, to send them on to heaven with glorious celebration and great excess. Though many of those dead thought themselves bound for Valhalla, as did many of the warriors who burned sacrifice to them. They spoke about the dead and their passage to heaven, but thought something different. The revels of funeral festivity was always best to honor with grand expressions of life. There would be much merrymaking tonight. The raider looked forward to such a night as he built the pyre for a man. Some tents were collapsed and their staves piled to make the pyre. 12 big pyres were built. The warriors dead were laying on their backs. They had their hands gripping tightly their weapons, axes, swords, the shields they fought with at their left side. And then they were surrounded by the wealth of their horde. Some had gold, some had jewels. Finely worked necklaces and rings adorned their bodies. With them were laid other weapons and offerings and gifts. Lengths of silk and ribbon too graced the stacks. These men and women were sailing Varangian. Finally, as the sun neared the horizon, the preparations had all been made and the sacrifices of the horses were readied. Each pyre had a horse brought to it. 12 were assigned the task of sacrificing them at the same time during the prayer, and at the call from Harold, Raider, with his axe, stood aside a horse as one chosen to perform the sacrifice. Our friends, Harold began, these brave fighting Varing, we here commit to their fate. They are the ones with the greatest luck, for they now are sent to heaven to live in peace with God. He bowed his head. Guthrum, you may come and perform the pagan rite, Harold offered. A wizened old man stepped forward, and many hushed as he did. He wore robes and had a string of bones around his neck. They that were still bound to the gods will spend all time feasting and fighting in the hall of the High One. May their ancestors receive them warmly. May the Valkyries ride swift to take them to their homes. By the eye of the All-Father, do I send these their lick back to meet their soul. And on that purpose we send them with brave steeds taken in their last battle upon Midgard. He shouted and brought down his hand. 12 blades fell and chopped into the necks of 12 horses, and they were each of them killed. Those who performed the sacrifice continued to cut until the head was removed from the body. This took many blows, but Raider took only 3. He lifted the head of the horse by its hair, blood streaming out of the neck, and placed it on the pyre at the warrior's feet. Women came with wooden bowls and collect the blood that flowed still from the body. Once filled, they stood and backed away. Men then came to the horses and lifted them onto the piles of wood. The other two horses were also slaughtered and placed onto a pyre that was built for them, one being killed by Harold himself. They too had blood taken in bowls and were placed on pyres with great ceremony. The women that took the blood now walked around the solemn army of raiders and dipped 2 fingers into the bowls. They then painted lines down the foreheads of the others. 14 women walked through the crowd and made sure every pagan was blessed so by the strength of the horse. I dedicate these sacrifices, Guthrum said loudly, to Odin for his war wisdom, to Freya for her war cunning, and to Thor for his war strength. May they keep watch and safeguard our deaths until the day we are all met again in Valhalla. The crowd, particularly the blessed, cheered uproariously. Now, my sailing Varangian, we stay this night in the village and go in the morning. But for tonight, we feast, celebrate the life and these deaths. We shall send our fallen to the golden halls with song and story. Eat as much as you can, for the rest we burn in the morning. A parting sacrifice for fair winds and good waves. He turned and conferred with another among his host. And what is more, he said, garnering the quiet of his warriors, we have found in the storehouse here 2 great pots with Byzantine wine, stolen from the ships bound for Miklagard, no doubt. But they shall not ever reach their destination, for tonight we shall empty them both with our merriment. Much more did the crowd cheer at this. The pyres were then all lit. The oil found among the stores, propelling the fires to great heights quickly. The warriors with blood on their face watched with gaiety as their friends' bodies were sent to them in the afterlife, in Valhalla. These 12 died, all in a victorious battle. They were most certain in Valhalla, even if nominally some said they were Christian. Many other fires were made in the village as it grew darker and darker with the setting of the sun. The raider sat by such a fire, eating bread and hard cheese with his mead horn full of wine. He wore now his great cloak, the white bear skin wrapped around his shoulders and could close in the front. His other white bear wrap was only a shoulder covering and hung halfway down his back, something he liked to have to signify himself when in battle. The half cloak and this one were both clearly cut from the same skin. Ah, I love Byzantine wine, said Bodil. She was a stout and ample woman who had become something of a friend to the white bear. There was as well sat Hafard and his lover Inga, and the warrior skald Niels. Who does not? It is delicious. The Romans knew much about the making of this fine drink, Niels said, looking at his cup with appreciation. Everyone I know loves it. We are the wineskins, Inga said. The what? Asked a man with a thick, braided red beard. Have you never heard what we are called? She looked around. There were a few nods. Raider had heard it. We are called the Emperor's wineskins by many in the city. Halfveld laughed loudly, sputtering as he did. Raider smirked at his laughing. I love this! The Emperor's wineskins. That is a fine name for us, Bodil said, taking a drink. What is your name, black hair laddie? Asked the unknown man who sat in face of the raider. You haven't met this one yet. He has no name, said Hafald, taking another drink. The raider considered his cloak. You can call me Fitbjarn. The man looked at him, and Niels grinned. White bear? Like your cloak. That is not a real name. It was not his name, in fact, but it was one he had used in the past when pressed as thus, White Bear for the cloak he had made himself. Who are you that would have my name? He asked, this without threat in his voice. I am named Ragnar, after the famous hero. His name will live forever, and mine will be added to the stories, nae doubt. Fitbjorn, perhaps, too, will be in the story. Harold is the only one with a story to be told now, Fitbjorn responded. Do you know the story of Ragnar? Asked Inga. She looked at those sitting around the fire. Do you know why he is called Lothbrok? Why they called him Harry Breeches? I know this story, said Bodil, who sat comfortably in recline. They say he wore breeches of hairy goat hide to walk across a field of venomed snakes to win his first wife. That is not what I have heard, said Niels. I heard he had to kill a great wolf and a bear with his spear to marry the shield maiden Lagertha. Inga and Bodil both laughed. Niels put out his hands in a questioning manner. Why is this so funny to you? Shield maiden, the woman Inga said. If you think she was a maiden, then you are a fool. Lagertha was the greatest woman who ever lived. She watches over us all from her seat at Valhall. This she said with a respectful solemnity in her voice. I have heard that he had to fight a great serpent, and it could not kill him because of his shaggy breeches, and that is why he is called Lothbrok, said the young man with the long blonde beard named Niels. There are surely many stories about so famous a pair, Fitbjorn said. They were truly great warriors. Ragnar and Lagertha. They are probably drinking and laughing with our friends, and to our victory right now. He raised his horn. Everyone in the circle did so as well. Hail Lagertha! Hail Ragnar! Hail to the slain! Skål! They all yelled at once, and many in other circles shared their fervor and shouted their hails back. They each of them poured out some of their drinks onto the ground for their hailing. The Fitbjorn noted that the red of the wine dripped onto the sand like blood. Everyone in the village then drank together. They drank too many things. The sun had set and was gone. The foods were still being eaten, the wine being drunk. It would be a long night of feasting. Such was the way of the feasts. Fitbjorn drank deeply, savoring the taste. His belly was full and his war fury was sated. There was a warm fire burning, and companion warriors told stories of heroes and legends. It was a good night to be living on Midgard. He stood from the fire, the others looking up at him, and he threw the left side of his cloak over his shoulder in a more dramatic fashion than he intended. Where are you off to? Going to hunt more corsairs or Jotnar? Asked Niels jocularly. He's going to piss. Clearly. Leave him be, Hafald replied. Calm your love. We can all hear you, Inga said, and all laughed. It was during their laughter that Fitbjorn took his leave. He was going to hunt, certainly, but not for Jotnar. He finished his horn and fit it into the leather holder he wore at his waist. He made his way to the far place of the village, where he'd ridden horses in the early morning. The darkness had enveloped the land now, and he could see none of the landmarks he had in the day. He knew he had been somewhere here before, as the houses were to his left, but knew not exactly where. I saw you walking away from the fires, she said from behind him. He nodded and turned to her. They were not the company I wanted to keep tonight. Gertrude, what other name have you? He asked, turning and walking to her. She laughed. So certain you are. Perhaps you have Sather yourself. He stopped before her. She stood nearly as tall as he. Magic is the provenance of women. I would not seek to know the ways of it. Odin learned Galdr. He is sometimes called the Galdrfather. Fitbjorn laughed. I am not a god. She smiled at him. Your Odin wanted to learn the ways of all things. Galdr was the way of doing that. She started to walk to the crags and stones beyond the camp. He turned to look after her. My Odin? Do not you worship Odin as well? You speak of Seidr or Galdr, so I think you are not Aesir. Still walking, she turned back to him. That is the way of learning magic. You know how of the way all things fit, for better or for worse. He rolled his eyes. Well, what gods do you believe in? Why can nothing be simple? Because nothing is simple. That is the first lesson of Seithr. Fitzbjorn sighed. He took the 3 steps they were apart quickly and grabbed her arm, spinning her to look at him. I have no wish to learn of Seithr tonight. Well, you may not have a choice. She leaned in and kissed him hard. Her arms lifted from his grip and wrapped over his shoulders. He grabbed her by the hips and pulled her into him. I'll lay down my cloak. He unfastened the tooth clasp and lay the heavy white fur down on the loose sand. When he was done with this, he looked and saw her step onto the cloak. She was naked already. His eyes grew wide at the lithe and strong figure of her body. He unbelted his tunic and lifted it off, fully expecting her to have disappeared when he emerged. But she was still there. Her naked body looked somehow ethereal to him, like magic had shaped her lick as well as her mind. She grabbed him again and pulled his horn from his belt. From somewhere she produced a skin and poured into it. He looked down, barely able to see in the dark of the night. He smelled at the horn she offered him. This is... His eyes grew wide. Mead! I have not had a mead in a season! Drink deep. I think you'll need the strength. He wrapped his arm around her again and took the horn with the other. I have enough strength. I have more than enough. You will see. He drank deep from the horn. How cool and salty the mead was. He quoted from his favorite story. She laughed. Strong you are, O mighty white bear. She knelt down on the fur and started to unclasp his belt. He stood tall there a moment, enjoying the sensation of power. He drank again, and when she was finished, knelt down with her, his breeches falling down as he did. I am called the True Eyes, she said. I am Gertrude True Eyes. He kissed her neck. She started to breathe heavy and moan softly. That's you peeking behind the veil. I am White Bear. That is my name until my fate is done. Then it is a good name for you. Fitbjorn. Soon he too was naked, and she took him to the furs, as he took her. They lay together in pleasurable embrace. The power of the raid made them both eager to partake in life, and their love-making was nearly violent with passion. Fitzbjorn fucked her like a berserker, strength and rage and force, while Gertrude withstood and even matched the approach, mounting him and riding him like a wild beast. He lifted to kneeling and took her from behind like an animal, holding her hair and waist, and she reached back to grab his waist as he did. They loved in such potent embrace for some time, their strengths and passions, even to the other. He climaxed within her while she lay on her back, while he bellowed like an ox with the strength of his emission. He clawed at the ground with his feet and pulled the fur tight. Gertrude groaned at him and scratched his back viciously as she came with him, and not for the first time. After it was done, he supported himself over her, breathing almost gasping at the incredible strength of his orgasm. His front dripped with sweat, and Gertrude lay back in ecstasy. He breathed until he had the strength and pulled out of her, feeling another shudder of pleasure as he did. Fitbjorn toppled to the right, then landing on her left thigh, and barely managed not to pin her arm. She pulled her arm from under him obligingly and fell heavy to the fur. Gods! He growled, still gasping in huge wafting breaths. Animal, beast, she breathed. You come so loud that I cannot help. I always have. He took a moment to breathe. It is a devastating thing for me. I think the gods love me. That is not how most men come. That one most certainly shook the tree, she said with a smile that he did not see. He laughed. Much experience, have you? He asked with humor in his voice. Not so much as you, I think, warrior bear. Are you sleeping? She asked, noting his breathing. It is not uncommon for me after such love-making. The air in the June night was warm, and so neither were chilled or wanted the cloak over them. It is late in the summer season. The people of my home are tending the crop right now, praying for a good harvest, hoping to stave away their deaths of winter. Fitbjorn rolled onto his back and splay, all limbs out. I have no home, he said. My home is here. It is now. My home is always just this. Then you are most fortunate, for this is a good home. She crawled up to him and laid her head on his shoulder. I am most fortunate. I too think it is a good home. And the heaviness of his head lulled him low. His satisfaction was now complete. All things were settled in his mind. He drifted off to the deep and heavy sleep of a warrior. End of chapter 2. Obviously, I had a bunch of things that I wanted to say with that chapter. The last little segment, least among them, or most, depending. I mentioned earlier, and something that I really want to expound upon is the concept of the 5 souls of a human. It is a very interesting concept that these Northerners, these Scandinavians had. The idea of the soul being a singular entity in us that feeds to us our personality and our mind, that is actually a rather, I don't want to say Christian specifically, more Abrahamic religion doctrine. But in their culture, the body, humans had 5 distinct parts of the soul, which goes into the creation of human myth by Hjörnur, Lothar, and of course their brother Odin. They took the sticks of an ash and an elm and made the lick, which was the body. You can think of the lick as the wet clay. Then from that was formed their hamra, your shape. The shape was another distinct part of your form. The hamra was given to humans by Lothar. That was his gift. Then Odin gave to the human, the creature, its ond, which can be separated into the mind and the memory. Ond means mind, and it can be separated into hugur and munur, thought and memory. Of course, you know of hugin and munin. And then Hjörnur gave to them their blood, their godly hue, force of life, breath of life. That was the last part of the soul. or I don't know, I'll probably get them all out of order. I don't care. But those are the 5 parts of the soul, which is one of the reasons that burning was so common for funeral rites. Not exclusive, of course, there were burials all the time, but burning was a big one so that the lick, your body, would reach up into wherever the rest of your body was. Valhall, Folkvanger, wherever you went when you died, wherever you were bound, whatever the fate spinning Norns had determined for you. Yes. And anything you were burned with, anything you were funeral pyred with, would go with you. Very, very interesting parts of it to me. And I loved writing this segment. As I love writing every single segment, every single chapter. They're just wonderful. I had a great time. I really hope you're enjoying it. I'm going to stop it there. And thank you all so much for joining me for chapter 2. I'll be doing chapter 3 very, very soon. And if you find yourself with somebody who might be one of the Valkyrier, do be sure that you fuck like a Viking.